Hello and welcome. Today we're going to tackle a really big idea, something that's at the very heart of so many countries around the world, the connection, or maybe the disconnect, between democracy and economic inequality. We're going to unpack how these two powerful forces interact and what it all means for all of us.
And this really is the core question, isn't it? I mean, in a democracy, the whole idea is that every single vote is equal. But is every citizen? How can we have such huge gaps in wealth and opportunity when we're all supposed to have the same power at the ballot box? Let's get into it.
All right, so here's our game plan for this explainer. We'll kick things off with the basic promise of democracy. Then we'll look at the stark reality of the global wealth divide. After that, we'll try to understand why this gap is so persistent. But don't worry, it's not all bad news. We'll also look at democracy's silver lining. And we'll wrap it all up by talking about the real fight for a voice. Sound good? Let's dive in. Okay, first up, one person, one vote. We're going to look at the beautiful promise of democracy and then compare it with the often harsh reality.
So this is a really important distinction to make. On one hand, you have political equality. This is the bedrock of democracy, right? It's the principle that says every single citizen gets an equal right to vote and to participate in their government. Simple enough? But then, on the other hand, you've got economic equality. And that's the idea that the rewards of a country's growth, the wealth, are shared fairly. And just because you have the first one doesn't mean you automatically get the second. That's where things get complicated.
All right, now let's get into the global wealth divide. We're going to look at some numbers, and I have to warn you, they can be pretty eye-opening. But it's so important to see the real scale of this issue.
Okay, look at this number, 77%. In India, just the top 10% of the population. They hold 77% of the entire country's wealth. Just let that sink in for a second. We're talking about a country of over 1.4 billion people, and a small handful at the top control more than 3/4 of everything. It's a staggering figure.
And just to be clear, this isn't a problem that's unique to India. Not at all. Let's look at the United States, another of the world's biggest democracies. There, the top 1% owns over 30% of the nation's wealth. So again, you see this incredible concentration of wealth at the very top. And this chart really drives the point home. Let's look at Brazil and South Africa. In both countries, the richest 20% of the people take home more than 60% of all the income. Now look at the other side. The poorest 20%, they get less than 3%. It's not just a gap, It's a massive chasm.
Okay, so we've seen the numbers, and they paint a pretty clear and pretty stark picture. So the big question is, why? Why does this gap hang around? In systems that are supposed to be built on equality, why does it seem to get worse? Let's dig into some of the root causes.
It really boils down to four key things that all kind of feed off each other. First, you have the concentration of wealth itself. When elites have so much money, they also have the resources to influence political decisions, basically to shape the rules of the game in their own favor. Second, this creates unequal access. The poor often get locked out of good education, quality healthcare, and decent jobs. It's a cycle that's really hard to break. Third, even when governments try to help with welfare policies, these promises can fall flat. Sometimes the help just doesn't reach the people who need it most. And finally, there's global dependence. Poorer countries often find themselves in a position where they have to rely on richer nations, which can limit their own economic choices.
Now, I know all of this can sound pretty grim, but it's not the whole story. And this is where we see democracy's silver lining. Because the very system of democracy actually gives citizens the tools they need to fight back. This is what makes a democracy so different from, say, a dictatorship. It creates this space for people to organize, to protest, to raise their voices and demand real change from their leaders. And that public pressure, it can be a total game changer. And let's look at a perfect example of this in action. We're going back to India to talk about something called MGNREGA, which was passed in 2005.
So what this law did was just revolutionary. It guaranteed 100 days of paid work every year to rural families. It created this vital economic safety net. And look at the impact. It provided security to over 8 crore families. Now, for those who don't know, 1 crore is 10 million. So we're talking about 80 million families. It was a massive step in the right direction.
And this isn't an isolated case. We see a very similar success story coming out of Brazil with a program called Bolsa Família. The idea behind Bolsa Família was pretty brilliant. It gave cash directly to poor families, with one condition: their kids had to go to school and get their regular health checkups. It's such a great example of smart, targeted policy making a huge difference. It helped over 3.6 crore, that's 36 million families. And it was a major reason why extreme poverty in Brazil dropped so significantly. It just goes to show you the power of good policy.
Okay, for our final section, we're going to do something a little different. We're going to break down a really powerful cartoon that I think perfectly captures this whole challenge we've been talking about. It's all about understanding the voice of the poor.
And this really gets to the heart of the matter. Political equality, the right to vote. It just can't translate into real power if economic inequality is so extreme that it completely silences the poor. A vote is one thing, but a voice is another.
So let's look at this image together. The first thing you probably notice is the covered mouth. It's such a powerful symbol, isn't it? It represents the voicelessness of the poor. Even though they might be the majority in a country, their struggles, their needs are just completely ignored by the people in power. Now look a little closer at the clothes. They're all patched up. This isn't about fashion. It represents a life that's just barely held together. It's about surviving on quick fixes and temporary solutions, not on long-term stable support. A life of constantly having to repair things instead of building something solid.
And then you see the bare feet. This detail just speaks volumes about vulnerability, about having no basic protection, no security. It really reflects a state of neglect, a feeling of being left behind and forgotten.
So, that brings us to our final thought. If democracy gives the poor a vote, what does it truly take to give them a voice? That is the real challenge, isn't it? Something for all of us to think about. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.